FanRag sports columnist John McMullen. And first and foremost, we'll welcome him to the show and say, hello, John. How are you, pal?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
John, I can't believe this, but before he left and he had to leave, Mike Gill did not know that the OJ Simpson parole hearing was today.
He's the only one. Man, so I guess he wasn't on Twitter today at all.
Yeah, it is going up on Twitter.
Yeah, everybody in creation is doing their play-by-play of OJ's parole hearing. And he got parole, so congratulations. After 9 years, basically October 1st, OJ Simpson will be out. And that was that's kind of a black eye on the legal profession if you think about what happened there, because obviously OJ gets off on a double murder charge that basically 99% of the people in the world believe he killed two people, which is an atrocity. On the other hand, you have this knucklehead memorabilia story, and he's sentenced to 33 years in prison for what, if you and I did it, Pete, we maybe would have gotten a year, worst case scenario. And, you know, the judge in that particular case sentenced 33 years for a reason, and that was for the $33 million O.J. Simpson lost in a civil case to the Goldman family. So it's a black eye on the legal profession for numerous reasons.
I saw the Kansas City Chiefs were in my trending topics on Twitter, too, while you were answering that question, and said, well, gee, why are they in there? Apparently one of the commissioners from the parole board was wearing a Kansas City Chiefs tie.
Yeah, very professional. So that, of course, was the butt of many jokes. Is that part of his regular wardrobe? We don't know. Is he wearing the Chiefs tie because there's an ex-NFL player in front of him? That's probably the case, and it would, you know, obviously you should probably take your profession a little bit more seriously than breaking out the NFL tie, but that's just speculation on my point, from my part.
Well, I know that you're not John McMullen Van Susteren or anybody like that, so we'll move away from legal talk or anything like that.
I did go to law school, Pete. That's why I know all these things.
Where was that?
Delaware. So there you go.
Interesting. See, I could not pass the bar. I know that. You know,
I did not pass the bar. I did not say that. I was fed up with school.
So are you like Frank Abagnale Jr.? If you had a law degree on the wall, that how did you pass the bar in Louisiana? You know, you've seen Catch Me If You Can. The guy was cheating.
I'm one of those people that knows a little about a lot, but probably not as much as I should on certain issues.
Well, thank goodness you know a lot about the Philadelphia Eagles, because that's the main reason we have you on every day at 4 o'clock to talk about what's going on. And, of course, training camp opens on Monday. But one of the things, John, that we did when Mike took off to coach his baseball team is Nick and Josh and I all sat here and played a little game of what if, you know. And one of the things we were talking about is Doug Pederson's future. And basically we're going to go a little deeper in the 5 o'clock hour and take a look at all the Philadelphia sports teams and who will still be around when they, you know, because if you argue that all the Philadelphia sports teams are in some sort of rebuilding mode, and I know the Eagles don't like to use the word rebuilding, but one of the things we brought up was will Doug Pederson, when the Eagles do get back to having success, will it be with Doug Pederson as the head coach, or will it be with somebody else? So when you look at Doug Pederson big picture-wise, what timetable do you think he has, and when do you think the patience runs out, or how do you view Doug Pederson big picture-wise?
Well, I do think there's going to be some patience, and that's just speculation, and more towards the old regime than anything else, because I do not think Jeffrey Lurie wants to be seen as one of these owners that constantly makes rash decisions. And all of a sudden, if he hands the keys to the car to Chip Kelly, takes them away, goes back to Howie Roseman as the general manager, and then hires a coach and fires him after 2 seasons, well, you start to get more closer to a Daniel Snyder realm than a sort of a Jeffrey Lurie, what he was known for during the Andy Reid regime, and that was a guy who stayed the course. So from that standpoint, I think he's going to have a little bit of a longer rope. But I mentioned with Mike yesterday, he's not helping himself with some of these quotes he's throwing out there and comparing this team to the Brett Favre, Reggie White Packers and saying they have more talent than that group. I mean, that's something, even if you believe, as a head coach, you should be smart enough to sort of pump the brakes and not say that in public, because that's going to come back to haunt you at some point if you're not that good. And I always bring up, Pete, how many times do people talk about the gold standard in this town? Right. Because and how many years ago was that Jeffrey Lurie just said it kind of off the cuff, and it's still brought up. So you're kind of hurting yourself when you make those kind of comparisons. I think Doug needs to be smarter about that type of thing, and I think he will be. But head coach in the NFL is a tough job. You sort of learn by doing. There's nothing that can prepare you for it. And I think every coach goes through it, and Doug is no different. But I think for the people that assume if the Eagles don't improve this year that he could possibly be fired, you never say never, but I doubt it, only from the standpoint, as I said, that Jeffrey Lurie doesn't want to be that type of owner that makes rash decisions.
John, Nick Costco here. Thanks for joining us. Sticking with Doug Pederson, you kind of already alluded to it that Jeffrey Lurie kind of does not want to be that type of owner, in terms of a franchise like the Cleveland Browns or Jacksonville Jaguars, just to name a few, where they want to go through a revolving door of coaches. Do you kind of foresee that making Doug Pederson's job safer for the next couple of years, considering they're kind of going for it now, but they're also, based on their draft picks, are kind of building for the future? You think that kind of makes Pederson's job safe for at least the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I do. More from the Lurie standpoint than anything else. I mentioned, yesterday when you talk about Pederson and the Packers comparison, that kind of elevates the talk outside the organization. And you have already people speculating. And I think the one thing possibly that you could point to that might change things is that John DeFilippo is a really, really well-regarded guy inside that building. And I think they view him as a future head coach in this league. And if it becomes a question of what would you rather have, the guy you think is going to be a superstar in the profession or keep moving forward, and they don't feel that way about Doug Pederson, maybe that's the one curveball you could see. But I doubt it. While I say it may be 5-10% chance of happening. And by the way, I think the Eagles are going to be improved. That's the other part of it. I think they are, just from the fact that Dallas is going to take a step back. The Giants are going to take a step back. And the Redskins are, talent-wise, they're better than people think, but they're a dysfunctional mess in the front office. So I think just from the standpoint of the other teams in the division coming back toward them, and the Eagles have improved a little bit offensively, I think they will be incrementally better.
Speaking of those offensive improvements that you just alluded to there, Alshon Jeffery was actually just listed at number 13 as the 13th best overall wide receiver in the NFL, according to Fox Sports. He's ranked behind guys such as Brandon Cooks, Amari Cooper, Hopkins, and Demaryius Thomas, but he's ahead of guys like Jarvis Landry, Doug Baldwin, and Julian Edelman. Do you think he kind of is that where he's really supposed to be on this list, or do you really think he should be a little bit higher, if healthy, maybe towards the top 10 receivers in the NFL?
Yeah, I think he would be higher if he was healthy and playing and didn't have the suspension as well. You have to add that to it. I think if he was on the field for 16 games consistently, he's more in the realm of pushing the top 5 in that list. But, Those lists are always big pre-training camp. It's kind of silly to compare Alshon Jeffery to Julian Edelman, for instance, a pure slot receiver. It's two completely different positions. But as far as an outside the numbers guy, he's as good as he gets if he's on the field. If he's on the field, and that's a big question mark from two standpoints: the health and the fact that, as we saw with Lane Johnson last season with a second suspension, you always have to be concerned with that as well. But when he's been on the field, he's performed, and he's performed at a high level. And I think he's one of the best receivers in this league as far as going and getting 50-50 balls, which is always a quarterback's best friend.
John McMullen on 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles insider, also covers the NFL for FanRag Sports. John, you're talking about Alshon Jeffery. How do you rate receivers in this league? It may not be a pure 1 to 10 list, but do you feel that is it the route running? Is it the physical ability? Is it the hands? What are some of the things that you think are the most valuable traits for a wide receiver in today's NFL?
Well, it's everything, but when you're talking about outside guys, it usually tends to be athletic ability, because one of the biggest concerns with Mike Evans coming out was the fact just how limited his route running was in college. He lined up on one side of the field 100% of the time, was asked to run 2 or 3 routes, and he turns into a superstar. Why? Because he's more talented than just about anybody else. But those things obviously help when you talk about a Marvin Harrison type who just ran every single route perfectly every single time. That helps you with creating separation and things like that. So when you have it all meld together and you have tremendous athleticism with excellent route running and technique, and then you become Hall of Fame worthy. But obviously, when you're talking about a position, a thoroughbred position, whether it's wide receiver, running back, cornerback on defense, it's always about the athleticism first and foremost in this league.
John, transitioning to the national scene, Trey Turner of the Panthers just signed a 4-year, $45 million deal within a few days after the Panthers firing their former GM, Dave Gettleman. So, do you think this whole situation is really adding up to some of the rumors earlier this week that it's just a deterioration of the relationship between Jerry Richardson and the GM, or do you think that the Turner signing was going to happen anyway?
Well, you would hope it was going to happen anyway, because if not, Marty Hurney certainly hit the ground running, and his main problem was getting in salary cap issues. So you don't want to be handing out deals like that willy-nilly. So you hope that was in the pipe. But I got it from 2 different NFL sources, so I'm pretty confident that Jerry Richardson was upset at sort of the relationships that were being developed with players that meant a lot to that organization's history. A lot of them gone. Steve Smith, D'Angelo Williams, did not get along and really had divorced themselves from the organization. And as I mentioned with Mike yesterday, Jerry Richardson is the only owner that used to be a player. So he has more of a sort of understanding of the player's perspective. And when you add into it, Thomas Davis is having trouble getting an extension. He is, Cam Newton is obviously the face of the franchise, but as far as the heart of the franchise, it's Thomas Davis. And he doesn't want that. And he doesn't want those issues with Charles Johnson, Julius Peppers in the past. And as I mentioned, Williams and Smith, he wants a family-type atmosphere. And that's what Gettleman was very good from a business standpoint, but he wasn't very good with those other things.
John, with the Panthers, you have a situation where they've been the 2 Super Bowls since Richardson had the franchise, and it's only been a franchise that's been around since the late 90s. What do you think the long-term goals are for Richardson with the franchise? Because he's no spring chicken. He's one of the older guys in the league, ownership-wise. Do you think that he has a timetable that he's looking to try to get to back to Super Bowl and maybe win a title? Is he kind of looking at Cam Newton as his career is the window that I have to get a ring? What do you think the long-term goals are for Richardson at this point?
Well, their long-term goals are like a lot of the NFL. They're short-term. They expect to go to the Super Bowl. They consider last year the anomaly, and they think they're closer to the 15-1 team that went and lost to Super Bowl 50. So, that's probably unrealistic, to be honest. It's very difficult, obviously, to go 15-1 in this league, but they're probably not 6-10. They're somewhere in between. The question is, what is that? Is that 8-8? Is that 12-4? Obviously, they think they're closer to a 12-4 team, and we'll see how that shakes out. It's a very difficult division, though. I mean, both of the NFC's last two Super Bowl teams come out of the NFC South, and Tampa is sort of charging around the edge there. A lot of people think they're ready to make the next step. And then you have New Orleans, which is the run of the litter, and they have Drew Brees, who's a Hall of Fame quarterback. So they're always going to be difficult on any particular Sunday. I think it's the toughest division in the NFC, but the Panthers think they're ready to compete for a Super Bowl right now.
John, going over to the off-the-field stuff now, Michael Vick was just in the news recently because of his comments about Colin Kaepernick, saying that the first thing he should do is to cut his hair before he gets signed by a team and to look more presentable. Then he obviously apologized for that amid the scrutiny. But, in your mind, what does Kaepernick actually have to do to get signed at this point? Because, I mean, really, I think teams are probably going to wait until after training camp, or at least until a couple weeks into the season, till there's some injuries to even look at Kaepernick. But, I mean, what do you think he has to do to get signed? And also, I mean, do you even think he is going to get signed this season at all, even as a backup?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with Colin Kaepernick. And one of the things that people don't like to bring up, at least from his side of the fence, the people that defend him, is he hasn't really explained his goals. Does he want to be a starting quarterback? Does he want to be a backup? Because you have this kind of false narrative that he's one of the 64 best quarterbacks in the world, so he should be signed. Well, that's obviously true. It's two things, and it's very, very childish as well, at least from a level of thinking. I mean, take Seattle, for instance, which is the one organization that brought him in, talked to him, and they eventually signed Austin Davis, and everyone was up in arms because in theory, Kaepernick's a better quarterback than Austin Davis. But Austin Davis signed for the league minimum. Is Colin Kaepernick willing to play for that? I doubt it. I don't know that for a fact because he won't go on record and say what does he want, what is he willing to play for. So first off, he has to sort of, come to grips with what he wants to do. And if he wants to be a starter in this league, it's going to have to be what you just mentioned. He's going to have to wait for an injury and something of that nature to crop up. And at that point, if a team is desperate, they might make the phone call. But you brought up Michael Vick. Think about all the criticism. Now, Mike Vick's comments were dumb, but he has a right to them. He shouldn't have to apologize for those comments. But he did because everyone took aim at him, and he felt necessary. So that kind of speaks to the controversy you're going to have. And generally, coaches in this league don't want backup quarterbacks where they're going to have to spend 14 of their 15 minutes of media availability talking about the backup quarterback. That's just reality.
Frustrated lawyer John McMullen with us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. He's actually our 97.3 Eagles insider. He's also a national football columnist for FanRagSports.com. And before we let you go, John, I see that you retweeted the best-selling jerseys by state. And I can see some of the names are kind of photoshopped into the map. But any surprises on that list for you, or any of them that, do they all gravitate right toward down party lines, if you will?
Most of them. I think the biggest surprise is probably Adam Thielen. I think was North Dakota, and which kind of surprised me. Carson Wentz didn't win that, and Carson didn't win Pennsylvania because that was John Connor, but he did win New Jersey, I believe. So
wasn't John Connor? Wasn't John Connor in the Terminator? I mean, isn't that the name of the kid's Sarah Connor's son? It's John Connor, right?
It might be.
It is actually. It is. Yes.
He also beat cancer. I think that's the more important thing that everyone wants to buy his jersey, and I applaud that. But and Marshawn Lynch is just the entire West Coast. He's got that locked down.
Well, listen, everybody wants a Raiders jersey, right? Lynch on a Raiders jersey.
Well, we'll get you a we'll get you a John McMullen gavel, and actually, I shouldn't even joke about that because the judge is legitimately looking for a robe right now. He messaged me this morning. Damian Musiani did and said, "Hey, do you know where I can get a robe?" So, I don't want to make any jokes that I'm going to give you the gavel first before we give it to our actual judge. But John, now we had fun with you. We'll talk to you again tomorrow, and training camp starts on Monday. Okay, buddy?
All right, thanks, guys.